Your father was here the night the sky turned red. The voice said from the darkness beyond the trees, and Clara Bennett felt the world tilt beneath her boots as the wind carried the scent of pine and cold earth across the clearing. The blood moon hung low over the ancient forest, staining the canopy in a muted crimson glow that made the air feel heavier than it should have at 9,000 feet above sea level. Clara stood at the edge of what her research team had labeled Zone Delta, though she now knew it had another name whispered only in warnings, the core. Her breath came out in slow, visible clouds as the temperature dropped below 40 degrees, and every instinct she possessed told her she was standing somewhere she was never meant to find. The clearing stretched nearly 100 yards across, unnaturally circular, the soil beneath her boots faintly warm despite the November chill. Her instruments had gone silent the moment she stepped past the tree line, screens flickering, batteries draining as if the ground itself rejected measurement. And then he stepped forward. Adrian Wolfe did not look like the monster described in 30-year-old government briefings or campfire myths told in small mountain towns. He looked human, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark wool and leather that moved quietly as he crossed the clearing, his silver-gray eyes reflecting the moonlight like polished steel. There was no threat in his posture, no raised voice, yet the space between them felt charged, as if the earth itself recognized him. Clara swallowed, tightening her grip on the weatherproof case slung over her shoulder. "You've been watching us," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Adrian's gaze shifted briefly to the tree line, where her team's trucks were parked half a mile away. "You've been digging," he replied, his tone calm, controlled, carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. The wind stirred again, brushing Clara's hair across her face, and for a split second she saw something flicker behind his eyes, something older than anger, older than fear. "My father disappeared in this forest 30 years ago," she said. "He logged coordinates that matched this exact location." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of history. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your father stood where you are standing now," he said at last. "And he made a choice." Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. For years she had chased paperwork, redacted files, classified reports that spoke in careful half-truths. She had believed her father's disappearance was an accident, a landslide, a miscalculation. But accidents did not leave coded journal entries referencing guardians or energy signatures that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the soil. She took a cautious step forward, feeling warmth radiate through the soles of her boots. What did he find? Adrian's gaze dropped briefly to the ground between them. "Not what," he corrected quietly. "Who?" The word lingered, and Clara felt it settle into her bones. The core was not just an energy source. It was something alive, something bound to this land long before survey maps or property lines existed. "If my team drills into this area," she said, "we could destabilize an entire ecosystem." Adrian looked back at her then, truly looking, as if measuring not her credentials, but her intent. "If they drill," he said, "you won't just wake the forest. You'll wake everything that's been holding its breath for 30 years. A tremor passed through the ground, subtle but undeniable, and Clara realized with a rush of clarity that the forest was not reacting to her equipment. It was reacting to him. The blood moon climbed higher, and for the first time since she stepped into the clearing, Clara understood that her father had not vanished into nothing. He had stepped into a truth too large for one world alone, and now that truth stood 10 feet away, watching her choose whether history would repeat itself or finally change. Clara did not sleep that night. The clearing remained warm long after Adrian stepped back into the tree line and vanished as if the forest had simply folded around him, and she stood there alone until the cold finally forced her to move. By the time she reached the research trucks parked just over half a mile away, the blood moon had faded into a pale gray dawn, and the generators hummed with ordinary indifference as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She climbed into the mobile lab, shut the door, and locked it with hands that still trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of what she had just learned. "Your father stood where you are standing now. He made a choice." The words replayed in her mind as she powered up her laptop and accessed the encrypted archive she had spent 5 years trying to decode. Most of her father's field notes from that final expedition had been wiped, replaced with blank timestamps and corrupted files. But there was one folder she had never been able to open, labeled simply North Sector 7. Her pulse quickened as she entered the passphrase she had tried 100 times before. Nothing. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the blinking cursor. If her father had known this place was more than geology or energy, he would not have documented it plainly. He would have hidden it. Clara closed her eyes and pictured the clearing again, the way the soil radiated heat beneath her boots, the way the air felt charged around Adrian. Not what? Who? Slowly, she typed a different phrase into the password field, one she remembered from childhood, something her father used to whisper when storms rolled over their Colorado cabin and the power flickered out. Not afraid of the dark. The screen froze for a moment that felt like an hour, then the folder opened. Clara leaned forward, heart hammering, as scanned journal pages filled the display. The entries were dated 30 years ago, written in her father's precise, careful handwriting. Coordinates matched the exact latitude and longitude of the clearing. Mentions of energy fluctuations measured not in watts but in pulses, described like a heartbeat beneath the soil. And then a line that made her breath catch. The Guardian is not the threat. The threat is what will happen if either side tries to claim what was never meant to be owned. Clara swallowed hard. He had known. He had stood in that clearing and realized the core was not a resource. It was a balance. Footsteps approached outside the trailer, and Clara quickly minimized the file. Through the narrow window, she saw Ethan Morales, her lead geologist, holding a tablet and frowning at the latest seismic readings. She stepped outside to meet him, the crisp morning air biting at her cheeks. "We lost signal around 2:30 in the morning," Ethan said. "Every sensor within a quarter-mile of Zone Delta just went dead. It is like something scrambled them." Clara forced a calm expression. "Or like something does not want to be measured," she said quietly. Ethan laughed lightly, assuming she was joking. "The board is pushing for a preliminary drill by the end of the week. If this energy source is as strong as we think, it could power half the state." Clara glanced toward the tree line where she had last seen Adrian. The forest stood silent, patient. She thought of her father's final entry in the open file, the last words before the record ended abruptly. "I will not let them turn this into another war." Her chest tightened. 30 years ago, her father had chosen silence over exposure. He had protected something he did not fully understand because he believed coexistence was still possible. Now the same coordinates sat in her hands, and the same choice loomed in front of her. Behind the calm rhythm of generators and distant birdsong, Clara felt it again, faint but steady, like a pulse beneath the earth, waiting to see which world would make the next move. The council chamber carved into the mountainside felt colder than the forest at dawn, even though torches burned steadily along the stone walls, and the air held none of the winter bite outside. Adrian Wolfe stood at the center of the circular room, boots planted firmly against the polished granite floor, aware of every gaze fixed upon him. 12 council members sat in elevated seats arranged in a half circle, their expressions ranging from restrained concern to open distrust. The scent of pine resin and old stone lingered in the air, grounding and ancient. "The humans have crossed the boundary," said Marcus Hale, a broad-shouldered elder with silver-threaded hair and a voice that carried easily without effort. "Their machines are less than 1 mile from the core." A low murmur rippled around the chamber. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "They are scientists," he replied evenly. "They are mapping anomalies. They do not yet understand what they have found." "That is precisely the problem," Marcus answered. "When they understand, they will claim it." Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, though his posture remained controlled. He could still feel the faint echo of the core beneath his skin, the way the ground had responded when he stepped into the clearing the night before. It had pulsed in recognition, not submission. Across the chamber, Lena Carver, one of the younger council members, leaned forward. "We could approach them first," she suggested. "Open dialogue before this becomes a confrontation." A sharper voice cut in from the far end. "Dialogue did not protect us 30 years ago," said Victor Kane, leader of the hardline faction, his pale eyes steady and unyielding. "We signed a treaty. They signed it. And yet they return." Adrian met Victor's gaze without blinking. "They return because they are searching," he said. "Not because they are invading." Victor's expression hardened. "You speak as though you understand them." The implication hung in the air, heavy and familiar. Adrian did not flinch. He had heard it his entire life, in whispers when he passed, in pauses that lingered too long. Not fully one of us. I understand both sides, he said quietly. That is why I am king. A silence followed that statement, not empty, but charged with unspoken history. Adrian's mother had been human. He had been a child when she was lost during the conflict that nearly tore both worlds apart. He remembered her voice, calm even when fear pressed close, telling him that strength was not proven by domination, but by restraint. He carried that memory like armor. The core responds to lineage, Lena said carefully. To balance. Victor's gaze sharpened. To purity, he corrected. Adrian felt the faintest tremor beneath the stone floor, subtle but unmistakable. The core was aware of tension, of division. Purity did not end the last war, Adrian said, his tone still level. Balance did. He turned toward the council as a whole. We will not strike first. Could either steady two worlds or push them into another generation of fear. If you are going to stop us, then say it clearly, Clara said into the quiet forest, her voice steady even as her heartbeat quickened at the sound of footsteps approaching through the trees. The late afternoon sun filtered through towering pines, casting long shadows across the narrow path that led back toward the clearing. She had left the main camp behind, telling Ethan she needed fresh air to think, though in truth she needed answers that could not be found in data logs. Adrian stepped out from behind a line of aspen trees, as if he had been part of the landscape all along. He wore the same dark coat, sleeves pushed back slightly, his expression unreadable but not hostile. The distance between them was no more than 15 feet, close enough for her to see the faint reflection of the sky in his silver eyes. I am not here to stop you, he said calmly. I am here to understand what you plan to do next. Clara exhaled slowly. My team wants to drill exploratory shafts by Friday. 4 inches in diameter, no deeper than 100 feet at first. Standard procedure. Adrian's gaze shifted briefly toward the ground beneath them, as if he could see far deeper than any drill bit. And if what you find confirms your projections? He asked. Clara hesitated. She had spent her career believing in measurable outcomes, in peer-reviewed certainty. But nothing about this forest fit neatly into charts or spreadsheets. Then funding increases, she admitted. Infrastructure follows. A muscle in Adrian's jaw moved slightly, not anger but calculation. Infrastructure does not coexist well with what rests here, he said quietly. Clara studied him. There was no exaggeration in his tone, no attempt to intimidate. Just conviction. You said my father made a choice, she pressed. What was it? For a moment the wind was the only sound between them, brushing leaves together in a restless whisper. Adrian looked past her toward the distant hum of generators barely audible through the trees. He realized the core responds to balance, Adrian said at last. Not ownership. Not control. Balance. Clara felt that word settle inside her chest. Balance. He chose not to expose it, Adrian continued. He believed that if both sides tried to claim it, neither would survive. The consequences. Clara's throat tightened. And you agreed with him? Adrian met her eyes fully then, and for the first time she saw something beyond leadership there. Grief. My mother was human, he said, his voice low but steady. She believed the same. The admission lingered in the space between them, fragile and powerful. Clara had read enough history to know the war had been fueled by fear and misunderstanding, by leaders who mistook dominance for strength. If my team drills into the core, she said slowly, it could disrupt something we do not understand. Adrian nodded once. Yes. And if your council decides we are a threat? She asked. A faint shadow crossed his expression. Then the peace your father tried to preserve will not hold. The truth of that pressed against her like altitude sickness, sharp and disorienting. She had come here to uncover what happened to her father, not to stand at the fault line of two worlds. You are asking me to shut down a multi-million-dollar operation on instinct, she said. Adrian's voice did not rise. I am asking you to look at the evidence your father left behind. Clara felt the weight of her father's reopened journal in her backpack, the words that spoke not of conquest but caution. She had always believed science was about discovery. Now she was beginning to understand it was also about restraint. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky a muted gold. Adrian took a step back, creating distance without retreating. Meet me at the clearing tomorrow at dawn, he said. Come alone. If we are going to prevent this from becoming something neither side can control, you deserve to see the whole truth. He turned then, disappearing once more into the forest, leaving Clara standing in the fading light with a decision forming quietly in her chest. The generators hummed in the distance, steady and relentless, but beneath her boots she felt it again, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat waiting to see which promise she would keep. Dawn arrived without ceremony, a thin silver light stretching across the horizon as Clara stepped quietly past the sleeping camp and into the forest alone. The air hovered just above 38 degrees, sharp against her lungs, and frost clung to fallen leaves like fragile glass. She carried only her father's journal and a small flashlight, though she did not need the light. The path to the clearing felt etched into her memory now, as if the land itself had marked her steps the night before. When she crossed the tree line, the clearing greeted her in stillness. The soil no longer radiated warmth the way it had beneath the blood moon, yet there was a subtle hum beneath the quiet, a low resonance that she felt more than heard. Adrian stood near the center, hands clasped loosely behind his back, gaze lifted toward the fading stars. He did not appear surprised to see her. "You came," he said, his voice calm in the morning hush. Clara nodded, her breath visible between them. "I need to see what he saw." Adrian studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the center of the clearing. "Stand where you stood before," he said. She moved carefully, boots pressing into the cool earth. As she reached the center, Adrian stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could sense the quiet steadiness in him. "Close your eyes," he instructed softly. Clara hesitated only a second before obeying. The forest sounds sharpened in the absence of sight, the distant call of a hawk, the faint rustle of branches. "The core responds to lineage," Adrian said. "Not just mine. Yours." Clara felt a flicker of disbelief, but before she could speak, the ground beneath her shifted subtly, not unstable but aware. A warmth spread slowly upward through her boots, along her spine, into her chest. It was not heat in the physical sense. It felt like recognition. Her pulse aligned with something deeper, slower, as if her own heartbeat had found an echo underground. She inhaled sharply and opened her eyes. The soil at her feet shimmered faintly, not glowing, but reflecting light in a way that defied explanation. Adrian's expression softened with something close to relief. "Your father stood here," he said, "and the core answered him as it answers you." Clara's fingers tightened around the worn leather cover of the journal. "He wrote about balance," she whispered. Adrian nodded. He discovered that the core amplifies intention. If approached with greed, it destabilizes. If approached with protection, it steadies. Clara's mind raced. Energy amplification based on intent defied every scientific model she had trusted, yet the evidence pulsed beneath her feet. "That is why drilling is dangerous," Adrian continued. "It is not just disruption of land. It is disruption of equilibrium." Clara swallowed, glancing toward the distant direction of her camp, less than a mile away. "My board will not accept equilibrium as a measurable risk," she said quietly. "They will want data." Adrian met her gaze fully. "Then give them data that protects both sides." The words lingered, simple but impossible. Clara looked down again at the faint shimmer in the soil. Her father had stood in this same place, felt this same resonance, and chosen silence over exposure. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood consequence. A soft tremor passed through the clearing, subtle yet deliberate, like a breath held too long finally released. Clara felt it in her bones. This was not just a discovery. It was a responsibility. And for the first time since she arrived in these mountains, she understood that the truth about her father was not only about what happened to him. It was about the promise he had made to something older than fear, and the question of whether she was strong enough to keep it. Clara returned to camp just as the sun cleared the ridgeline, casting pale gold across the valley and lighting up the line of research vehicles like something ordinary and harmless. The world beyond the tree line felt almost normal again, generators humming, coffee brewing inside the main trailer, Ethan reviewing seismic charts on a tablet as if the earth beneath them was not listening. She paused for a moment before stepping fully into view, grounding herself in the sound of boots on gravel and the familiar weight of her backpack against her shoulders. Inside the mobile lab, she closed the door and locked it, setting her father's journal on the metal table with deliberate care. Her reflection in the darkened monitor looked steadier than she felt. The core had responded to her. Not to equipment, not to pressure, to her. She powered up the workstation and began cross-referencing her father's notes with their current readings, layering 30-year-old pulse measurements over present-day seismic fluctuations. The patterns aligned too precisely to dismiss. What she had interpreted as unstable energy spikes were rhythmic variations, responding to proximity, to emotional intensity, even to conflict. Her stomach tightened as she recalled the tremor during Adrian's council meeting, the subtle shift beneath her boots when tension rose. The core was not just sensitive, it was reactive. A knock sounded against the trailer door. Clara minimized the data before unlocking it. Ethan stepped inside, concern lining his forehead. The board scheduled a video conference at noon, he said. They want confirmation that we can begin preliminary drilling by Friday. Investors are watching this one closely. Clara nodded slowly, forcing her voice into professional calm. Tell them we need 48 more hours for environmental impact verification, she said. Ethan blinked. We already ran those models. Run them again, she replied. This ecosystem is more complex than we thought. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded and stepped back outside. Clara closed the door again and exhaled. 48 hours was not much, but it was something. Her gaze drifted back to the screen where her father's final entry glowed faintly. If they discover what it truly is, fear will replace reason. Protect the balance, not the secret. She pressed her fingertips lightly against the metal tabletop, recalling the warmth beneath the soil at dawn. Adrian had trusted her with the truth of the core. He had revealed not just its nature but his own lineage, the quiet burden he carried as the bridge between worlds. And yet within his own council there were those who saw that bridge as weakness. Clara could feel it now in the data, subtle fluctuations increasing since yesterday, like a rising tide beneath the numbers. The core sensed division. If either side escalated, it would amplify that fracture. Her phone buzzed softly with a message from the operations director in Denver asking for confirmation of Friday's drill depth in inches and projected megawatt yield. Clara stared at the message without replying. 30 years ago her father had stood in the same clearing and chosen to shield something greater than his career. Now she stood in a mobile lab less than 1 mile from that same ground, with funding, reputation, and the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying with it the faintest tremor through the valley floor. Clara felt it in her chest, a reminder that the core was not waiting passively. It was listening, and somewhere beyond the trees, Adrian was likely facing pressure of his own. The peace between their worlds did not rest on treaties alone. It rested on the next decision either of them made. Clara reached for her phone, hesitated, then set it aside. 48 hours. She would use every minute of them to find a way to present the truth without triggering the fear her father had warned about. Because if fear took control of either side, the balance beneath the earth would not remain silent for long. The tremor came just after sunset, subtle but undeniable, rippling through the valley floor like a distant roll of thunder beneath the soil. Clara felt it while standing outside the main trailer, watching the sky fade from pale blue to deep indigo. Around her, technicians moved between vehicles, unaware that the ground had shifted in a way no instrument had recorded. She glanced toward the tree line, her chest tightening. The core was reacting again. Less than a mile away, in the mountain chamber carved from stone and memory, Adrian felt the same pulse travel through the floor beneath his boots. Conversation in the council room fell silent as the torches flickered. Victor Kane rose slowly from his seat, pale eyes sharp with satisfaction rather than concern. You feel that, Victor said evenly. The humans are disturbing it. Adrian did not respond immediately. He closed his eyes for a brief second, focusing on the rhythm beneath the tremor. It was not chaotic. It was agitated. There was a difference. No drilling has begun, Adrian said at last. This is not mechanical. Victor stepped forward, voice calm but edged with accusation. You met with her again. You brought human presence closer to the core. It reacts to divided loyalty. The implications settled heavily in the chamber. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between their king and the faction leader. Adrian's voice remained steady. It reacts to conflict, he corrected. within these walls as much as beyond them. Victor's jaw tightened. Conflict exists because you hesitate. Adrian met his gaze without flinching. Restraint is not hesitation. Outside the chamber, wind pushed through the high mountain pines, carrying tension down into the valley like a warning. Back at the camp, Clara's phone buzzed again with a message from Denver. The board had advanced the vote. Preliminary drilling was now scheduled for Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, 24 hours sooner than planned. She stared at the screen, a cold wave moving through her chest. 48 hours had become less than 24. Ethan approached from behind, concern etched across his features. They are flying in an oversight rep tomorrow, he said. They want visible progress. Clara forced herself to breathe evenly. We cannot drill, she said quietly. Ethan frowned. Clara, this is bigger than us. If we delay without cause, funding disappears. She looked toward the forest again, remembering the warmth beneath her boots, the pulse that aligned with her own heartbeat. Cause was not the problem. Proof was. Another tremor passed beneath her feet, slightly stronger this time. Several crew members paused, glancing at one another. Minor seismic activity, Ethan muttered, checking his tablet. But Clara knew better. The timing was too precise. At the same moment in the mountain chamber, a faint crack traced across the stone floor near the outer wall, thin but visible. Gasps echoed softly. Victor turned toward the council with quiet intensity. This is what happens when weakness leads, he said. The core rejects uncertainty. Adrian stepped forward, presence commanding without force. The core reflects us, he said firmly. If we fracture, it fractures. His gaze swept the chamber. And if any among us attempts to exploit this unrest for power, the consequences will not stop at these mountains. The room fell silent, heavy with implication. In the valley below, Clara closed her eyes briefly, feeling the rhythm beneath the earth accelerate. She understood it now with a clarity that frightened her. The core was amplifying tension from both sides. If the drilling proceeded while the council divided, the imbalance could deepen beyond prediction. She opened her eyes and reached for her phone, not to respond to Denver, but to send a single message to an unlisted number Adrian had given her. We are running out of time. The ground trembled once more, not violently, but insistently, as if the earth itself was reminding them that neutrality was no longer an option. Adrian received her message as the final light drained from the mountain sky, the single sentence pulsing against the dim screen of his phone like a warning flare in the dark. We are running out of time. He did not hesitate. Within minutes, he was moving through the forest, the ground steady beneath his stride, even as a faint tremor continued to ripple through root and stone. By the time Clara stepped back into the clearing, the moon had risen again, not yet. Red but bright enough to paint the world in silver. She heard him before she saw him this time, the soft shift of leaves, the controlled rhythm of breath that did not match human cadence. They moved the drilling schedule up, she said without preamble as he emerged from the shadows. Tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Adrian's expression hardened, not in anger, but in focus. The council is dividing, he replied. Victor is using the tremors to argue that the core rejects my leadership. Clara felt a flicker of frustration. It does not reject you, she said. It reflects instability. Adrian stepped closer, his presence steadying in a way she had not expected. Then we end the instability, he said quietly. Clara shook her head. You cannot silence your council any more than I can override a corporate board without evidence. She drew her father's journal from her pack and opened it to a marked page. He mapped the pulse frequency of the core during heightened conflict 30 years ago. The fluctuations increased in direct proportion to hostility. Adrian studied the handwritten notes, his gaze intent. He understood the pattern, he murmured. Clara nodded. If I can correlate his data with our current seismic readings, I can prove the core is reactive, not a resource, a system. Another tremor passed through the clearing, slightly stronger than the last. This time the soil near their feet shimmered faintly, as if responding to their shared focus rather than their fear. Adrian inhaled slowly, and Clara sensed the subtle shift in the air around him, not transformation but alignment. The pulse beneath the earth steadied, sinking for a moment with the rhythm of his breathing. She felt it again, that echo in her chest, her heartbeat finding the same tempo. It responds to both of us, she whispered. Adrian met her eyes, silver reflecting moonlight, and something warmer beneath it. Because it was never meant for one world alone, he said. The realization settled between them with quiet force. Her father had not discovered an energy reserve. He had discovered a bridge. If you stand with me publicly, Clara said carefully. If the council sees the core respond to unity instead of division, it undermines Victor's argument. Adrian considered this. And if your board sees measurable stabilization when drilling is delayed, Clara's jaw tightened. Then I can justify postponement as risk mitigation. Silence stretched briefly, not uncomfortable, but charged with shared responsibility. The forest seemed to lean inward, listening. Tomorrow before sunrise, Adrian said, bring your instruments. We will document the core's response together. Clara felt the weight of what that meant. Cooperation. Visibility. Trust. If this fails, she said softly, both sides will claim betrayal. Adrian's voice remained steady. If we do nothing, both sides will choose fear. The moon climbed higher, bright and watchful. Beneath their feet, the pulse slowed, as if waiting for dawn. Clara closed her journal and looked at him fully, not as an obstacle or a myth, but as the only other person who understood the scale of what was at stake. Then we do this together, she said. The earth answered with a gentle tremor, not of warning this time, but of acknowledgement. Sunrise arrived in a thin band of pale gold stretching over the eastern ridge, cold air hovering just above freezing as Clara carried 2 portable seismographs and a handheld thermal scanner into the clearing. The camp behind her was already stirring, engines warming in preparation for the 8 o'clock drilling demonstration scheduled less than 2 hours away. She did not look back. Adrian stood at the center of the clearing when she arrived, shoulders squared, gaze steady, as if he had been there all night, holding the line between worlds. Without words they moved into position. Clara placed the first sensor directly where the soil had shimmered beneath her boots, then set the second 20 yards away near the tree line to measure variance. The handheld display glowed softly in her palm, baseline readings stable but elevated. Adrian stepped forward into the center and closed his eyes, breathing slowly. The ground responded almost immediately. The pulse beneath them strengthened, not erratic but coherent, a measurable rhythm appearing on Clara's screen in clean, repeating waves. Her heart lifted as she watched the data graph stabilize rather than spike. It is synchronizing, she whispered, adjusting the sensitivity. Adrian opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Focus on intention, he said quietly. Clara nodded and steadied her own breathing, recalling her father's words about balance. Not ownership, not conquest, protection. The pulse deepened, the waveform smoothing further. The second sensor near the trees mirrored the pattern, confirming it was not localized pressure but systemic alignment. Footsteps sounded at the edge of the clearing. Clara turned sharply to see Ethan standing frozen at the boundary, tablet in hand, eyes wide as he took in both the equipment and the sight of Adrian. Behind him, a black SUV had pulled onto the gravel road, the oversight representative stepping out with a crisp suit and a skeptical expression. At the same moment, higher up the slope beyond the clearing, members of Adrian's council emerged from the forest shadows, including Victor, whose gaze flicked from the instruments to the soil beneath their king's feet. The clearing became a silent convergence point, humans on one side, wolves on the other, and Clara and Adrian standing in the center between them. Clara swallowed and turned the handheld display outward so both groups could see the live feed. These readings show a stabilization response, she said clearly, projecting her voice. When there is cohesion in the clearing, the energy system beneath it evens out. When there is hostility, it destabilizes. As if in answer, a faint tremor rippled outward, not disruptive but present. Adrian stepped half a pace closer to Clara, not in possession but in partnership. The waveform on the screen sharpened into a steady cadence. Ethan glanced down at his tablet, then back at Clara. The fluctuation dropped by 30%, he said under his breath, astonished. The oversight representative frowned, studying the data rather than the spectacle. On the slope, murmurs passed through the council. Victor's expression shifted from confidence to calculation as the ground remained stable beneath Adrian's feet. Clara lifted her chin slightly. Drilling into this site without understanding its responsive nature risks amplifying instability, she continued. A controlled delay allows us to map the system safely. Silence followed, not empty but thoughtful. The pulse beneath the earth held steady, a quiet affirmation. Adrian's voice carried across the clearing, calm and unwavering. The core does not belong to one world, he said. It holds because we choose to hold it together. The morning light strengthened, warming the frost from the grass. Clara felt the alignment beneath her chest and beneath her boots, no longer fragile, but deliberate. Around them, suspicion had not vanished, nor had ambition. But for this moment, data and presence had replaced accusation. The earth did not fracture. It breathed. And as the sun cleared the ridge completely, Clara understood that her father's choice had not been silence after all. It had been trust. In a future where two worlds could stand in the same clearing and decide not to break what held them both.